our primary purpose for being created, which is what? Primary purpose. To worship. To worship. And we looked at last week at the area of fellowship. We're created for fellowship. We're part of a family. We're called brothers and sisters in the Lord. So that makes us part of God's big family, right? Today we're going to see that we are created for discipleship. Discipleship. Now, when I say the word discipleship, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Thank you, Chuck.
Being like Christ.
Okay, being like Christ. What else? Discipleship. Huh? Servant?
Discipline.
Discipline, yeah. The root word of discipleship is discipline. So anytime you have a discipline, that means that you are training to become something or someone, right? It requires a discipline. An athlete requires the discipline of running or weightlifting or swimming or whatever athletics they are. They require certain discipline in doing that. And the better they become at learning that discipline, the better athlete they become, right? Because they're developing their talents, they're developing their skills, and they're developing their endurance. Okay? So, discipleship. Once we've discovered our primary purpose, which is worship, and we begin to enjoy the family of God in our fellowship times, then we need to learn how to become disciples. It's a very important part. God's design is that we become like Christ. Romans 8, 28 and 29 covers that very eloquently. God takes everything that happens in our lives and works it together for our good for one purpose, that we might be conformed to the image of His Son. Okay? So we are to become like Christ. Now, what does it demand of us in order for us to become like Christ? What are some essential things that we need to look for? If you're going to become like someone, what's the first thing you need to know?
What they're like.
Got to know what they're like. So we need to discover, what was Christ like? What was His characteristics? What were His priorities? How did He live? And how do you discover that from someone? There are different methods. How do you do it?
Study.
You study, read about them. You observe them. You watch them in living situations so that you see how they react in different situations. One of the greatest characteristics that Jesus showed was when He was before Herod. And he was questioning Him and saying, you know, you are the Christ, or are you the Christ? Or their accusations were being brought against Him. And Jesus, the Word says, spoke not a word. He didn't need to defend Himself. He didn't feel the need to say, well, this is who I am. You ought to know me. He spoke not a word. Why? Because He knew who He was. He knew why He was there. And He knew where He was going. He was steady in His identity and in His purpose. So He didn't need to defend Himself against false accusations. So we need to get to know Him. We did that with spending time with Him. We look at His life, study it, see the character He displayed, and then we duplicate it. We don't imitate it, we duplicate it. Because you can be an imitation of someone and not have His characteristics. Right? But if you duplicate it, that means you're incorporating those characteristics in your own life. And they're beginning to come out. You become a duplicate. So, how does God make us more like Christ? How does He make us more like Christ? That's what we're going to look at today. When people testify what Christ has done in their lives, many might say, well, the Lord changed my life. What's the first question you want to know? How did He change your life, right? How did He change your life? And what difference has it made? A lot of people say they know Jesus, but you look at their lifestyle and there's no changes taking place. So that gives me the understanding that they might know who He is, but they don't know Him. There was a saying that we used quite a lot back in youth ministry, that if there's no Jesus, you know Jesus, there's no change. But if you know Jesus, K-N-O-W, then you will know, K-N-O-W, change. It's kind of like walking the walk and talking the talk, right? Okay, so I asked what kind of changes took place. How did it happen? Tell me your story. How did it happen? Others might say, well, just wait on the Lord. They'll come, just wait on the Lord. Others will say, if it's going to be, it's up to me. So you got a passive approach, you got an aggressive approach. Well, I think it needs both of those. You can't just do one or the other. You got to have both. It's got to be a balance. So this study that we're going to look at today is so much more to it than what we're going to see today. These are basics that we're going to cover today. And we're going to discover that God has a part in our discipleship, and we have a part. All right? Philippians 2:12 and 13, and the New International Version reads like this: continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to do according to His pleasure, or His good purpose. So number one, our part is to work out our salvation. Now notice, I didn't say we are to work for our salvation. There are a lot of different groups that think we are working for salvation, that we are saved by works. But that's not what James says. James says that our works proves our salvation. And that's what Paul is talking about here. We are to work out our salvation. It's something we already have. He says, work out your salvation. It belongs to you already. You have already been born into the family of Christ, because he's talking to believers here. Jesus bought and paid for your salvation. You received it as a gift. So now it's up to you to work out your salvation. It belongs to you already. You are to work it out. That means it is to be worked out through your life. What Jesus has done.
It's like a practice.
Exactly. It's a practice. And thus, discipleship. You are beginning to discipline yourself so that the characteristics of Christ that is in you begin to develop and work out.